So, hello everybody. This time I'm interviewing Matthew Shlomowitz, and let's start with the first question. Matthew, to your mind, what is good music, or what is good musical composition?
Well, I think I don't think there's an answer to that question. That question sounds essentialist, as if there would be an answer. Um, I think art can do lots of stuff. It can be funny. It can be emotional. It can provoke. It can draw one into music. Can draw one into listening to the sounding shape just for itself. It can educate. It can surprise. It can provoke chills. Um, so I don't think I could provide a criteria um, that would fit more than one work.
Yes, yeah, got it. So from you, as I understand, so there's different musics, and different music have different functionalities, and therefore we cannot build or universal criteria. Yes, did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm not sure. Just thinking about the word functionalities, but certainly it can have different effects and different values.
And what
It
do you
can be
mean?
valuable in lots of different ways.
Sorry, sorry for interrupting. What do you mean by affects and values?
Well, that music or just art generally can affect us in different ways, and those different ways can have value in different ways. I mean, there's value in being entertained, and there's value in being in in uh, in being surprised or um, in laughing or crying. There's just that they're just different experiences. So I suppose if I would try to provide a criteria, I would say I simply like works that present very strong experiences,
So,
whatever that type of experience might be.
okay, maybe you can tell me the last musical piece, which created such strong experiences.
Well, I mean, this morning I went running, when I was running, I was listening to a album called "Workaround" by Beatrice Dillon, which is an electronic artist who's doing kind of techno, but kind of experimental techno, let's say. And yes, it's good. It's a good example because I really was enjoying it enormously. But I also thought I think this is great music to run to. This is also part of my enjoyment. Like it was. I wasn't sure how I would if I would enjoy it in other contexts nearly as much. So here's a very sort of funk to use your word. It's a very functional example. That it simply was giving me helping to push me to run a bit faster, and it was keeping me entertained and passing time very well.
Right.
That doesn't. There's more to say about the Beatrice Dillon than just my running experience, but I'm just giving a sort of autobiographical answer from my morning.
Okay.
Mhm.
And what is your musical idea or signature? How you thought about it?
Yes, I'm going to try and answer lots of your questions today, Sandras. But I've thought about that one, and because you've given me some of the questions to think about in advance, and I just don't have an answer for you on that one. I think that's um, I have tried and failed. I've got nothing interesting to say. I'm sorry, or nothing
What do
that
you mean?
I'm convinced by.
Yes. What do you mean tried and failed?
Well, I tried it, and I tried to think about the question, "What is my musical signature?" And every answer I came up with was unsatisfying. So that's
Okay.
why
Right.
I
Right.
think I
Right.
failed.
Yes. 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 And how is your way? How you usually? How is your way or pattern of composing? How it starts and what kind of stages it goes through?
Yes, I mean it's not like a set path, but I guess there's some typical things that happen in the process. There's the ideas in the shower or when you're walking that provoke you to sit down at the piano or sit down at the computer and try stuff out. And Yeah, and then I guess I'm a big fan of the focus group approach to composing. So when I'm making mock-ups on my computer of pieces I'm working on, I'm sharing them with friends to get feedback, not just critical feedback, but also just descriptive feedback. How they're experiencing it. I'm very always wanting to know how is. Of course, it's not the work is never experienced just in one way, but how does this one person experience it in time is super valuable for me to know that. So I would say there's the ideas, there's the trying stuff out, and then there's the feedback, and it's all
Yes.
going in a kind of
So you have an
iterative loop.
idea, right? So you have a conceptual idea, and then you have musical some kind of fragments, and then you send them to your friends, collect feedback on experiences, and based on that feedback, and you build the entire composition. Correctly, understand?
Yes, I mean you put that probably a bit more systematically than the reality is, but some all those things certainly do happen. Yes.
One of my friend, Stephen Prince, mentioned you that you are a good example how, let's say, how internet um, how internet created a new, let's say, new kind of musical vocabularies from what there is music could be created, right? And you are one of the composers who are doing that. Is it typical for you, or
Is it typical? Is that the question? Sorry.
yes, is it
Yeah.
typical for you, right?
Well, first of all, that's generous of Stefan to point towards me, but I think there's a series of pieces I wrote around starting at 2010 called Popular Contexts, which were a series of pieces were for instrumental musicians and samples, and it's true that those samples almost all exclusively came from the internet, and even more specifically from a website called freesound.org, which is a beautiful website, a community of sound recordists who just share their files, which people can download for free. And it's organized in a very nice way that you can simply, of course, put a word in like aeroplane or punch or whatever, and then you get big tagged files, which is interesting because then you start to give you ideas, I would say, for composing. But I was for sure just simply interested in the idea of how music frames the way that we hear. I should go back a step. The recordings that I use are always very concrete, so they're always identifiably a train or a fart or a baby crying or whatever, something that you can identify. And so I'm always interested in how that inflects the way that we hear the instrumental music, and how the instrumental music inflects the way we hear the recorded sound. It's sort of like audio-visual approach in the way that, of course, if you imagine a sequence of war images and we combine that with very slow tragic music, that will make us experience the war images in one way. If we combine it with drum and bass, then we're going to experience it very differently. And if we combined it with a polka on an accordion, we experience it differently again. So I like this idea very much, that you can frame how things are experienced. And I like just to say, last of all, in particular, I think it's even more, or I was going to say even more potential, but anyway, a different kind of potential in this purely sonic space. Unlike my previous example with the images of war, here we have, if we imagine sounds of war and string music, then of course has this extra aspect to it is that they're interfering in the same medium, which I think creates new possibilities.
And at least from what you told me, so I understand that maybe three important things is for you as composer, right? One, I think, is experience. So you said a lot of times during this interview already. I'm looking on pieces and how experience is created and how it affects me. Then you said that you are going to, with your different kind of samples, you're sending it to the friends, right? So this seems that one very like cornerstone block for you as a composer, right? And second block, it seems for me, you mentioned as well as a lot, is not only like let's say multimedia music, right? So it's a way how you can play with sound and image, and maybe controversially or complementary or in different ways. And the third element is about using internet archives, right? Can it be some kind of did I correctly understand that these three things is important for you as a composer, right?
Everything you said there was good. Yeah, it made perfect sense.
What is the biggest fear you as a composer?
So I'm going to pass on that question too, Sandras.
Okay. By the way, this is a question. I think it is a
Did
question.
you have any good answers to this question? What are the most interesting answers?
Mm, it's very different. So that some composer saying Kira Kids that he will not be relevant anymore. I think this is quite popular. That somebody who is saying that music wouldn't be relevant for uh, for them. But actually, this I think is a question of, if I correctly remember, because it was this question was originated most probably uh, from Simon Stina Andresen. And actually, next question, is the Francois Chanel question. Why do you still compose, right?
I will try to answer that, but I'll keep it short because I don't think I have anything really so interesting to say there. But I think that it's in a way it's a selfish act. It's like playing a very long, hard, enjoyable game of chess. It's a challenge. It's stimulating. I wake up in the morning with enthusiasm to go and do it. It's a pleasure in a hard work kind of way, and that's a thrill. And then the other aspect is that I'm then curious to see how people will experience it. And of course, I suppose, and I'm also curious to see if it's something that resonates and sticks a little bit in the culture, without wanting to be too pretentious about it. Um, so I think that's the answer.
Got it. And next question is, looking 10 years back, right? What are the biggest changes in your music? What's different
I'll go.
between let's say Matthew Shlomowitz in 2000 in 2010 and 2020? What's the difference?
Yes, I mean I understand very well. Yeah, I think I will just quickly say that if I would do the answer for 2010, it would be a boring answer. So if I go to 2005, I think I can make a more interesting answer. 2010, I would just say I was making the popular context pieces that I described earlier, which I'm not doing anymore. I'm doing something different now, but I don't think the difference is so interesting. I mean, it's just a natural phase. There hasn't been a big shift. We just
But
moved through
comparing
phases.
2005 and 2020, like 15 years.
Yes, I think 2005 was a much more bigger shift in the sense that I had done my PhD with Brian Fernyhough, and had come out of a very high modernist, classical music orientated tradition, and I working in that sphere, and moved to London in 2002. And I just want to say that I had my first daughter in 2004, and then was living in my neighborhood and meeting a lot of new people who weren't musicians, but cool people, culturally interested people who knew about visual arts or dance or whatever, but who didn't know anything about new music, and became friends with a lot of different kind of people. And then they were asking me to play They wanted to hear my music, and I was just very embarrassed. I was trying to keep it away from them because it was just I didn't want to play them a piece for violin and piano that sounded like Fernyhough a bit. And then sometimes I did play it, and it was as I suspected. It was just uncomfortable, and I felt embarrassed, ashamed to be making something that these very smart, interesting people could really not get anything from. And so I think that this was in the next few years, I really just changed, and I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't feel comfortable. And I'll just add one other thing, that I at this time was also going to see a lot of live art and dance and theatre, experimental stuff that that was really inspiring for me. And it was also, I just simply saw that people here in these contexts were making work that was entertaining, funny, emotional, as well as being weird, challenging, and profound and strange. And I just wanted to do that. I wanted that. It was clear. Like I wanted someone to think about what I did like that. So it was somehow, I wouldn't say an epiphany, but over this period, I really changed the way I thought about what I wanted to do, and how people would experience it. And I wanted to make things that a broader spectrum of people could relate to.
Got it. So London was quite influential, right?
London,
Yes. You said that
yeah,
you moved here, right?
yeah, I think not so much London, but just being out of a university context after 10 years, and as I say, really for the first time in 10 years, hanging around with a lot of non-musicians because
Yes.
of my baby daughter, just meeting people in the park and stuff, and yeah.
Got it. And how technologically shaped your music?
So I think that technology shaped my music in the sense that I'm lucky to be in the sense that I'm a very low tech guy. You said before the interview turned on it, you're also a low tech guy. Um, so I'm worse than average with computers. But something happened in 2010 around this time where even people like me could do it. They could, download a file and use a DAW, or I was using GarageBand for a long time, just putting the samples in, making mockups. Um, so I would say the answer is that the development of simple interface technology meant that people like me could make work that engaged with technology.
And if you if you look, let's say not Matthew not as composer, but let's say Matthew as observer, right? Who stands and observes, right? Mm, to your mind, what are the biggest changes in, let's say, in music in the last 25 years? Let's say in this century, right?
In new music,
In new music.
yeah. Yes, I think that the word decentered would be the obvious place to start. There was a kind of pluralism that was emerging in the late 20th century that's then just went a lot further. I would say that there's now really decentered notion of in new music. It's a very fragmented scene. Um, I think I could say some practical things like the notion of theatricality in concert music performance 20 years ago was really at the periphery of new music.
Yes.
Of course, we know from Cargill and Globocar and others that there was always this happening for 50, 60, 70 years, but really on the edge. And now it's normal. So to go to a new music festival in Berlin or London, we expect to see the musicians doing non-musical things, whether they're acting or speaking or physical movement. So this is obviously a striking development that people have rethinking the concert hall space in ways that are no longer purely sonic. I think other things have happened that people make work that's humorous. That was, I would say, forbidden in new music for 50 years from the war, and maybe even just more recently, I would say emotionality is also becoming possible again to think in emotional terms. I would say in my musical education in the late 20th century, it was no one spoke about humor or emotion. They were, if they weren't even forbidden, they were just invisible. No one even thought to think about them. It wasn't part of the discourse. And then if I could end with a pessimistic note, I would say that 25 years ago it was that we still believed in new music, that new music was vital and important, and that we've lost those pretensions of high modernism. We don't I don't believe that, and I don't think many people believe that in a
Yes.
way that was sort of, I would say, underpinning my whole university education. That we were taught all these modernist techniques, not just as techniques, but in the some kind of Adornian notion that they would help people to think critically. And I could continue, but I'm too embarrassed to, so I'll stop.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, yes, yes, I understand. Yes, yes, yes. And how music audience change?
Well, that's an interesting question because I don't in I don't think it really has changed. I'd make one caveat to that. I think there's two things I'd like to say. Well, the first thing is I don't think it has changed much, but uh, I think lots of people have tried. I think composers, like I just described my own story, I think composers like me, and there's lots of them, have tried to make work that's more broad reaching. Um, and I think lots of curators of festivals, for instance, have tried to program work that might have a bigger reach. Uh, but I don't think that's changed the audience. Um, I think that the most successful ventures which have had an impact are the ones who have not rethought the aesthetic properties of the music, but rather the ritual of the presentation. So I understand this very well. If I once went to a concert with a mate of mine from high school who's not a musician, and
Yes.
he just hated everything about the concert. You know, the sitting down, and he's used to going to see rock bands, and he just thought the whole thing was awful and pretentious and snobby. And so I think there's lots of people who have brought music into the pubs and clubs and thought about new formats. So in London, we have lots of people who are thinking about this. And I think that's has a success that's been successful to an extent. That I have definitely been to some shows in London where there's been large audiences of young, good-looking, well-dressed, cool people, and it feels exciting to be there. Um, so I'm not entirely pessimistic, but in the main part, I would still say the majority of the concerts I go to, it's simply the same thing as it was 25 years ago.
Yes. Yes. And what do you think? Do COVID-19 push it more online? Because there is one way how you look on the music, right? That as you told, there is a let's say honestly, I remember I was in the concert, right, in New York, where we were four people. Actually, it was me, who was visitor, then a composer who came from Europe, and two from the staff. And to be honest, of course, not all concerts are fulfilled in Berlin. I don't know about London. I wasn't so much, but the same in Riga, of course. It's new music concerts is very, 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 very niche stuff, and there is some kind of notion in the air that maybe internet could unite that some kind of this unite this, let's say, globally distributed niche audience, and we will have more like online concerts with bigger reach, and maybe after some period of time we will have more, let's say, VR contents and etc. Right, which even more explore these opportunities of participate or experience music, as you told, in from distance. What do you think is somewhere going there or not? The audience will be more, let's say, internet united. It will be more online music.
I don't. I think I'm going to answer a different question, but I'm just share a thought that what I think is really interesting about videos on YouTube or whatever is to see which ones, because you do see these ones that really take off, and some of them are like, if you think of Johannes Kreidler's Chance music, which has got, I can't remember how many, like over 500,000 clicks. It's, you know, it's a great piece and it's a super nice piece, but it's also somehow made for YouTube. It's a YouTube really fitting perfectly. Another one like Tom Johnson's Failings, this fantastic piece for a speaking double bass player. There's lots of recordings. There's one by this kid doing it at a university recital in America, and it's got like 700,000 clicks, which is just very curious how that happens.
Yes.
Again, it makes a bit of sense on YouTube because it's a speaking piece, and it's a sort of YouTube footage. It's just someone holding a camera in the audience. But then I just saw the other day, there's a really nice piece by an American lady called Sky McClay called Many, Many Cadences, which is just a string quartet, not just a string quartet. It's a string quartet, and it's got the score follower. It's a really nice piece, and it has 50,000 clicks. And so that's very, very curious how that happened. I mean, it's highly atypical, I would say. And so, yeah, so I don't know I'm not really sure what I'm trying to say. It's just an observation. I think what's fascinating about the internet is that you would think, historically, I think new music has been very surprisingly nation state in the last 50 years, that there's really a French thing and a German thing and an English thing and an Italian thing. And you would have thought in the global world of the internet that this would really collapse. And for a long time, it really didn't collapse at all. And I would still say it's surprisingly persistent, you know, these national styles. Maybe the university teachers or whatever are still the main forces shaping the aesthetic interests. But I'm always surprised that this globalization and YouTube thing hasn't done more to erode that.
Got it.
Yeah.
And to your mind, what are the main future trends of new music? Will it be more technological or shaped, will it be, let's say, more democratized, or or it will come back to the roots, right? To traditions, schools, and etc. Or it will disappear. What are the main, to your mind, main future trends, and who shapes them?
I mean, I, if I knew, of course, I'd be a rich guy, or not a rich guy, but I could I'd have a great book to write or something. So I don't know the answer, of course, but to speculate, all I can say is at the moment, decolonization and race is a huge issue that I think is going to play out massively. And I think new music, because of its proximity to classical music, has enjoyed a certain prestige and channeled to funding that it's going to lose. I guess I think it's going to lose it, that privilege, and yes, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I'm not sure if I have anything else to say.
It's very interesting. It was sorry.
I think it will look really different in 10 years.
Yes, it was very, very interesting. The first stuff what you said. Can you just elaborate more on this decolonization and?
Well, it's this very big conversation in Britain and internationally. I think about university curriculums in particular, which certainly we're having at my work, and it's very complicated. I think that 10, 15 years ago we had the conversation about gender, and that was very uncomplicated in the sense that it was just terrible. It was just embarrassing that pretty much every concert I went to in the 90s was 95, if not 100% male, and it's totally uncomplicated that problem had to be fixed, and it's not fixed yet, but there's been a huge progress. I think everyone would agree in the last 10, 15 years. Certainly in Britain, I think if you're an ensemble only playing male composers, you'll get pretty shamed on social media pretty fast, as you should.
Yes.
But race is more complicated, I think, but I think that is to say, I think many people in the new music are looking to program now composers and artists who are non-white, and this is good in one sense, of course, but it's also, I think, much more complicated because it's almost a bit presumptuous to assume that non-white people want to be part of our scene, which is not such a great scene. But I think the real problem is just simply to do with capital, with money. Yes. That our scene has had disproportionate financing from government and probably from the private sector too, because of its connections to classical music. And I think we're going to lose those.
Yes. So it's two things, right? From you, what I understand, the main trends where music goes. One is it goes to all this, let's say, decolonization, but in bigger sense, like most, like gender, race, sexuality, etc. Right? So that there is a, let's say, maybe not bigger musical variety, but variety of those who create, bigger variety of those who create, and those who play music, their like bigger variety from, let's say, social background or background. The one thing where you see it goes, and second, where you see it goes is very interesting, and I think here you can be very. Let's say you have something in common with my friend Francois Cherand, then you see that it somehow, at least not reduce, funding will be reduced, and the social prestige of music, of academic music, gradually will disappear, so that it will be the same thing, maybe, probably, let's say in 2030, right, or 41, that it to be like between academic composer and electronic music composers, there won't be so big difference. Nowadays, one gets huge grants, and second, it's just hobby. So you presume that there will be no difference. Let's say that everybody will be more equal, more hobby. Let's say it will be more hobby music, right? Correctly understand, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the race to the bottom argument, right? That it's yeah, we just all end up as hobbyists. So it's I can't disagree with any of that, but it's starting to get depressing, the
Yes.
conversation. I'm joking, but yeah, no, I think that's right.
And what do you think? What is a role of new music in society? Honestly, maybe you partly answered, but still, right?
Yeah, we have to try and find some happy questions soon, but I think it has a very minimal role, if any. You know, I think art art will always have a role, but what art forms are currently significant or scenes are significant is always changing. And so I guess we imagine that when Strauss's Salome was premiered, it was a big cultural event. But I think, you know, things from our scene are rarely, if ever, big cultural events in the bigger society. So I think that's, you know, if you talk about role, I think, you know, the first part of that question is visibility. It can't have much role if it's not visible.
Yes.
I guess someone could argue against that and say it could be invisible and still have a role, but perhaps it permeates the culture somehow in a different way.
Yes.
A smarter person than I would have to make that argument. But I think if we just take the face value argument, I would say it would need to be big, have a bigger visibility to have a significance.
Yes. 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 I got you completely your point. Now maybe we'll have 5 questions on a little bit different topic. So
Okay.
as as we agree both that you are, let's say, one of one of characteristics of your music is to be multimedia music. So you use different multimedia, right?
Yes, I'm not. I was thinking about that. I'm not sure how to define the word multimedia. I mean, we can call ballet multimedia because it involves two media, right?
Yes.
Dance and music. But I think generally multimedia refers to work that's got two media and involves technology. Do you think that's right?
Yes. Yes. Why not? Right? Why
So
not?
so in that way, I wouldn't really call myself a multimedia artist because I'm not very technologically. I mean, I've done these pieces with samples, but they're not even multimedia because they're just in sound.
Yes.
Um, So I think I would probably think I'm more interdisciplinary than I am multimedia, but these are just terms, of course.
Yes. 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 But still, so you said that I understand your perspective of multimedia, right? Music is that you there should be two, at least two media and technology, right?
I think that sounds like a decent definition. Yeah, I'm not sure what the technical one is, but that sounds. I think that's how it's used.
No, no, at least projector is technology, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So
yeah. It's a piece with a slideshow and music would be multimedia, I suppose.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, 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 right. And and how it's different, right? This multimedia music, which we are seeing at least like emerging and booming, and maybe even a little bit decreasing. Maybe it's different perspective during this century, right? How it's different from previous paradigms. Why we are talking about multimedia music and what's different between extended techniques, let's say, paradigms of extended technique.
I think I understand the question, but I mean, I certainly, I think I can say something to that, but not in any kind of comprehensive way. There's lots of different kinds of multimedia, and there's lots of different kinds of music with extended techniques. But nonetheless, if we, I think it seems to me that lots of work that's multimedia today is a kind of program music of the 21st century, where people want to deal with the world we live in a direct way now, concrete way, form relationships, comment, say things, play with concrete, visible things from the world that we know. I think you know, if the definition of program music is a piece that sets up a relationship with an aspect of the world, either
Yes,
through its title or its program note or whatever, I think that's generally often what's going on here. But of course, it's the reasons and the aesthetics behind that are very different to 19th century notions of program music. But just that basic first fundamental premise, I think, is often. I mean, of course, there's simply abstract multimedia work too, which makes what I just said then totally not make any sense.
Yes.
But I would say by and large, that's what's often going on.
Yes. Can we say like that, right? Because it at least, and to my understanding, and in what you said, somehow partly as well, is that, let's say, second half of second um, new music avant-garde after Second World War was very formalistic, right? It was very, let's say, driven into itself, right? So it developed different kind of formal structures, and you know, and then it lead and culminated in, let's say, extended techniques just uh, to expand sounds let's say sounding elements and etc. Right, and bringing more, let's say, extending this type of of sounds and sound experience, right? And
I I just want to, sorry to interrupt you, but I think extended techniques for me, it's about the exploration of sound, of course, but it's also
right,
it's also about getting away from pitch. I think a lot of the time, certainly Lackerman in the '60s, I think that's what it's about. It's a kind of realization that even if people were composing serial or post-serial
yeah,
music, which had no tonal organization, people were still listening to that music with tonal ears, and
yes,
that was a problem. And so, getting away from pitch was a way of solving that problem.
yes, but what I what I mean by by this is that this music completely lost relevance, right? So it not relates to what's going on, right, in the world, right? And then maybe this new generation of composers just wants using different kind of multimedia, as you told, to get some kind of relevant of some kind of new relevance of music. At least that listeners could experience something more than just very formal structures of sound and sound manifestation.
I think that's. I think that I'm just going to. I need a cough. Excuse me. Um, I I think I want to make. I don't think that's quite right. That's just. I think it's almost right, but I want to add one aspect to it. I think that alongside the trajectory in the last 20 years towards engaging with the world, there's been another parallel trajectory, which has been engaging with sound, and not engaging with sound in the way that you put it. You were describing serial and post-serial music and even extended techniques as being kind of formalist, as if it was about sound. But somehow it's, when I listen to Boulez's structures 1B or whatever, it's we started our conversation about experience. It doesn't feel like it's about my experience at all, about a listener's experience. It's a very abstract and theoretical notion of sound. Whereas I would say it's quite the opposite now, that there's many composers in the last 20 years who I'm thinking of, like Kat Lamb, Elaine Radique, an older figure, Klaus Slang. I could list many people, Glenn Branca, who are thinking about sound as in what Shea Fair would call reduced listening, drawing the listener into the materiality of the sound, and often a very sensuous and experiential notion of the relationship with sound. So I think in a way you've had these two very different responses, which both make perfect sense to me. But they're one really all about immersive experience with sound, and the other about creating relationships with the world.
And to your mind, what music pieces are good examples of multimedia music? Can you name some?
It's so many. I don't know where to start really, but I'll just say some pieces which are close to my heart. I think Mikhail Baile's Exit to Enter and Blackjack are both masterpieces. Alexander Schubert's Sensate Focus is wonderful. Jenny Walsh's Total Mountain. I think I stopped now. I could really make a long list, but it feels a bit silly. I think there's many wonderful pieces. I'm quite pessimistic, as I feel embarrassed about how pessimistic I've been in this interview, because dispositionally I'm quite an optimistic person, I think. But I want to say that I think there's lots of wonderful work out there that I love and find inspiring, and am invested in.
Yes, 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 yes. And can you name some kind of, how did you start to use, let's say, different multimedia in your piece? What was the
The catalyst.
yes.
I think it was going to see a lot of shows, weren't music shows, dance shows, and of course, people in dance or live art or theatre are often bringing music into their shows. Um, there's kind of collapsing of genre boundaries. And so musical things were happening in their shows. And someone simply imagined that you could do something with musicians where that pointed in other directions too, from the
Yeah.
other.
Yes.
I don't think I can give you a good answer to that, but I suppose that's probably what happened.
Yes. And when you hear the word multimedia music, what kind of, let's say, composers comes to your mind? Which is like more, let's say, multimedia, who would be more attributed to this genre of music?
Yeah, I think I hadn't really thought about this before, but I'm not sure it's even useful. I think that the new music scene now, it's so diverse what happens on a stage
Yes, got it.
that it stopped being important,
Yes, yes,
and
yes.
that's nice.
Agreed.
You simply can hear a string quartet, and then the next piece is the string quartet's now speaking and with a video behind them. Like there's some just simply the most liberating thing is that when you're given a commission to write a piece for a situation, if it's a string quartet, there's a good chance that string quartet has been, if they're playing contemporary work, has been developing experiences and skills in a whole range of non-musical activities, and that all of a sudden the possibilities of what you can think about are very different and much broader.
Yes, true, 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 true. Last question, Matthew, and and, and the last question is: can you say something optimistic? Because as you somehow correctly noticed that somehow my questions goes a little bit into pessimistic, more in pessimistic realm. Can you give some optimistic thoughts at the end, right?
Yeah, it's nice that you offer me that chance, because I do feel a bit peculiar about being so pessimistic, even though I don't retract anything that I said. It's also possible that Brexit and COVID and various other things just make one a bit. And I'm living in a pretty hard lockdown at the moment in London, so maybe this is part of it. But and that all said, I will still struggle to answer your question, I think. Optimistic about new music. I'm certainly optimistic about work that people will make. Just for me, I could name 20 composers immediately who I'm following closely, whose work gives me enormous pleasure to see what they will do next. So I have no pessimism at all about this. And I'm very happy that the scene got so much broader and that people are doing, it's super nice. I don't. I can't think of anything to say. I'm sorry.
So thank you very much, Matthew, for the interview.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed talking to you.